Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 2 of The Magician's Nephew, Digory, and his uncle.
This was a very enjoyable back and forth chapter.
It's
just
the
pure dialogue.
The stereotypical villain tells his entire plan.
Yes.
Very odd. We're getting it here, chapter 2. Usually it's like at the end after the protagonist has been captured and they're tied up and there's a laser going towards them.
Yeah.
And then Goldfinger
and
just
then
says,
he
here's
starts
exactly.
monologuing.
Yeah, exactly. That's when it's time to do the villain monologue. But no, how about here before, really, I mean, this shows you how incompetent Uncle Andrew is that he doesn't know when to do the villain monologue.
Right.
You do it near the end. No. Way too soon, Andrew.
It also speaks to how Lewis doesn't stick to the used tropes. Or maybe the tropes hadn't been invented yet. We're not really sure.
There was definitely villain monologuing. I think
that fiction started in the 50s.
Oh yeah. I do think a lot of that kind of goes down to both superheroes and like the James Bond like spy kind of thing, and that actually wasn't that big at all at this point. Obviously, Fleming is writing at this point. No James Bond movies yet, not till the 60s.
Yeah.
And superheroes exist, obviously, but not to the same extent where
they're
they are
confined to the 4-color process.
Yes, they are not every single place you ever go, ever.
Yeah.
I was just lamenting this to you earlier that we were getting my son some coloring books, and like there wasn't a single non-licensed coloring book at Target. Like every single color, there wasn't just like, here's dogs. It's like, here's Paw Patrol. I'm like, I don't want Paw Patrol. He just wants animals. He wants the color animals.
Generic.
Like, don't have them.
Animals
we only
in
have
outline form.
Superhero animals or police animals, I guess. So, and he doesn't care because he's like, he doesn't watch TV. So what does he know? Like, he's just like, that's a weird looking dog to me.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I do remember when there were superhero movies coming out, but they weren't good. And that was bad too. So I don't mind that they keep putting them out there as long as they're decent.
Yeah. So let's jump into this chapter. Obviously, a lot to talk about. A lot of things are unveiled here for us. And for you as a first-time reader, before we do the chapter summary, anything that surprised you in all of this?
I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting the connection to be so vague and that Atlantis was going to be mentioned. I definitely wasn't prepared for that.
You didn't know that this Lewis had big fan of the 2001 Disney movie with Michael J. Fox.
If I am being completely honest, that is what I've been picturing ever since I read about Atlantis in this chapter.
Really?
Yeah. I keep picturing that movie.
We're not.
It was the first movie that I watched in a car on a highway.
Okay, that's the most boring beginning to a story I've ever heard. Speaking of boring, I don't
tell you about my dreams.
I don't want to harp too much on Atlantis here because you and I
soon.
Early 30s. No, not too soon, but
oh, you mean the movie?
Yeah. No, you too soon since the tragedy.
I thought you meant the Lost City itself.
Yeah. I think in our early 30s, we're part of a very small group of people that probably we were at like 10 or 11 when that movie came out. It was super exciting when it was coming out, and then everyone forgot that it existed because it's extremely forgettable. It's not great. But it's still one of those movies that for something that is so completely forgettable and not wonderful, I think about that movie too much. Like there's a lot of things I remember about that movie for something I think I saw once in theaters in 2001. And I'm like, I remember what that ship looks like. Yep. I know that the main character's name is Milo. I don't know why I know this.
Well, a lot of that speaks to just how your brain is built. I
mean, do you remember anything from that movie? There's like a little mole guy that like
I remember there was advertising for that movie everywhere. There were posters and every fast food seemed to come with it. Yeah, and I think I had a book somehow, so just a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe it was the art style itself that was iconic.
Was it? I don't know. But we don't have to go too much, but it is funny that you and I both, I would assume very few of our listeners read this talks about Atlantis. We get this Atlantean, kind of magic, if you want to call it that here. And very few people are going to remember that Disney movie that no one remembers,
Well, I think we found what we're going to do after we finish all 7
minute by
Chronicles
minute.
of Narnia.
We're going to do a minute by minute podcast, Atlantis. And then there's a second one where they go back.
Oh man, I forgot.
But I don't think any of the cast returned. It doesn't have Michael J. Fox, so I'm out. All right, well, let's do our chapter summary here. It's an even chapter, which means, Philip, you've written something out for us. Would you like to share that?
Yes. This is a summary of Chapter 2. Horrified by the disappearance of Polly, Digory starts to scream, but is quickly silenced by his uncle. Once the boy is quiet, Uncle Andrew informs him of his godmother, who had been locked away in prison, but requested that he destroy a certain little box in a bureau in the event of her death. His uncle recounts the history of the box, stating that it is quite ancient, dating back to the island of Atlantis, then reveals that it contains magic dust. In the right form, the dust can whisk anyone it comes in contact with off to another world. Recently, the correct form of rings has been found and crafted. Digory realizes that it is up to him to go find Polly. Resigned to the inevitable, Digory buttons up his coat, inhales, and then grabs a green ring.
Well done. I didn't listen. I'm going to be honest. I wasn't listening because, funny enough, you were the one that was struggling a little bit with the pronunciation of a word. Usually that's a me thing. So
there are certain words that I think people should be uncomfortable saying.
Okay.
But bureau is not one of them.
Bureau.
But it makes me uncomfortable because it is so confusing. And I said it wrong 20 times in
it's all right.
preparation.
So I had the little pronunciation here so I could play it, and I held my microphone up to it. I don't know if it came through or not.
It did.
But I
re-recorded that part, so hopefully we've edited that out by now.
Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. What I do need to share has nothing to do with Narnia, is that when I Googled bureau pronunciation, knowing that the little video thing would pop up from Google that you could click and that it says it, it says people also ask, and here is the fourth question down, how do you say FBI? In which someone has asked, is it pronounced FBI or Fibi? So... I love the fact, I don't want to make fun of anybody who's out there seeking knowledge, but that someone was like, I've only ever seen that acronym written, and I'm going to be having to say FBI at some point out loud, and I need to make sure, because there are some acronyms that you do kind of say them as a word, and others that you say the letters one at a time, like FBI, but someone wasn't sure about it, so they're like, how do we... Enough people have asked it that Google thought I might also be asking.
That this is close enough to, it has enough people asking to put it as number 4.
Mm-hmm. Well, Phil, I was actually listening. You did a great job working in all of this exposition that Uncle Andrew does. You already told us what stood out to you. So I think we should just go ahead and jump right in to Uncle Andrew. Are we going to call him Uncle Andrew or just call him Andrew at any point?
Well, I wasn't sure because I feel like Andrew seems too familiar. He's still a little bit aloof.
Sure.
And he's not on level with the kids.
Let's call him Uncle Andrew. That's fine.
He's an adult.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be.
Let's call
That's
him.
why I kept separating it that way.
That's fine. Or Mr. Ketterly, isn't that his last name? I believe.
Oh, yeah.
So, but no, we'll call him Uncle Andrew here, and starts off by putting his hand over Digory's mouth, and it's just this is creepy. Just everything he does in this is like, hey, like nobody wants to hear this because I just made a girl disappear. That's terrifying. And then he goes into this story about his fairy godmother. What do we learn about this fairy godmother?
She has a box in her bureau, and she's in prison. He presents that information in a funny way. Digory asks if she was in an asylum, and instead he says no. Nothing like that. She was just in prison, and he went to visit her, and she told him about the special box.
And as we learn this, we learn that his fairy godmother is Mrs. LaFay.
And that she's a fairy.
Oh, yeah, she's a fairy. That comes out too. I guess we didn't mention that. So his fairy godmother is Mrs. LaFay. We brought this up a little bit in our last episode as we talked about the LaFay fragment, this kind of very first rendition of this story that Lewis did not publish and reworked. And in that, I believe we brought up Morgana LaFay, or sometimes called Morgan LaFay, who is a witch or a sorceress in a lot of the Arthurian mythology and stories and legends. And in fact, I believe she's the half-sister at least in Thomas Mallory's Death of Arthur version. So obviously a very famous character from Arthurian legend. And even though we already mentioned it, I thought it was odd that Digory, usually Lewis points out that his characters, his children, for instance, know or don't know things about different stories. For instance, when Eustace turns into a dragon, he doesn't know that sleeping on a dragon's hoard turns you into a dragon, right? And so I was surprised that Lewis, and this happens to Shasta as well too, and Aravis, back in Horace and His Boy. I'm surprised that Lewis didn't tell us one way or the other, or at least the narrator didn't, if Digory understood, wait a second, I've heard that name before. Like, oh, if Digory had read more, wonderful books like all of y'all have done, he would know, wait, I've heard that name. That was a sorceress back in King Arthur's time. Or that he says, oh, and he did know this, and he knew that he couldn't be trusted because she was this evil sorceress kind of thing. But we don't get any of that here. And that's interesting to me because it's a very clear connection that Lewis just chooses not to. He doesn't actually make that connection for us, which he has done often in the past.
Right. Yeah, to the point that I don't think I even knew that until you just brought it up. When you brought it up the first time. I do wonder if Lewis is leaving it out because he's done it so much and now...
Well, this is the first book he ever wrote Narnia, yeah. So is that not true? Well, there's also a really interesting thing happening here as he's telling this story. He also is sliding into this really blatant, from at least from my perspective as the reader, idea of moral relativism, right? He says, it's Digory who asks, well, isn't there something wrong about her? And of course, Uncle Andrew responds with, well, it depends what you call wrong, right? He says people are so narrow-minded. Making these allusions to, moral virtues, all of these things really depend on your perspective. And we've talked ad nauseum almost, although I think it still is important, that this is something Lewis is continually pushing back against in his time period, in modern thought for him in the middle of the 20th century. He even, moving down a couple of paragraphs, as Uncle Andrew talks about this story more and more, and we learned that he gets this box, and Digory says, well, it was jolly rotten of you, right, to not follow through with your promise. You promised her you would bury it. You didn't do that. And Uncle Andrew responds, not even out of anger or meanness here. He responds what appears to be legitimately confused. Lewis says he has a puzzled look. And then he goes on to say, men like me who possess hidden wisdom are freed from common rules just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny.
At least he just comes out and says it.
But it's one of those things where it doesn't seem to be, I'm evil for the sake of being evil. Uncle Andrew is not a white witch, for instance. Is a very different character than the witch. He has misplaced a lot of his loves. I mean, think about the St. Augustine's kind of wrongful ordering of loves here. He values knowledge, he values study, he values curiosity. Those are not bad things, but he does it above so many other important things. As we see later on, his curiosity and his experiments are going to lead to him literally murdering animals, right? And doesn't seem to care at all. In fact, he doesn't really care if anything happens to Polly or not, as long as he learns something from it. So he's got his loves out of order. Yes, it's great to learn and to gain knowledge, but for what purpose? For what sake? There is a purpose. There is a virtue connected to knowledge and learning, and he has completely separated virtue from the actual knowledge. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this, Phil. I know it sounds like I'm on a soapbox here, but obviously it's something I love talking about as someone who's been in especially classical education for quite a while now. When Uncle Andrew receives this Atlantean box, one of the things that I noticed, and I also found it in some of our authors, and I'm going to talk a little bit about two of them today, is this idea of science versus scientism. Are you familiar with the phrase scientism?
No, what is that?
So, well, I'm going to let Lewis explain it in a minute. Back in January, earlier this year, I taught a class on the fiction of C.S. Lewis through my parish, and the fourth lecture I gave in this series of lectures was on That Hideous Strength, which I have talked about on the show. That since I read it, I think while it might not be my favorite, it gets up there. I do think it is Lewis's most underrated work. I think not enough people talk about it. I think a lot of people talk about those first two books in the Space Trilogy. You still haven't read it, correct?
I've read the first one.
Yeah, you've read the first one, but
not the entire trilogy.
Yes. And a lot of people read that, and I was one of them for a long time that read the first two and then took a long time getting into That Hideous Strength, which is obviously very different than the first two. Well, as I was talking about That Hideous Strength, I pointed out some, and I don't want to spoil anything from That Hideous Strength, but I talked a little bit about how Lewis seems to be kind of railing against modern ideas of science in That Hideous Strength, almost kind of, if you weren't reading it close enough, you might think he's almost anti-science. He's not anti-science, but it might appear that way if you didn't understand where his philosophy is coming from. Lewis is very concerned with, modernist abandonment of traditional objective values and truth, like he writes about in The Abolition of Man. And one author that I had studied, Rayanne Crowell, who writes in 1971, talked about this and kind of was trying to answer this question of, is Lewis anti-science? And I promise this comes up in what Uncle Andrew is saying. So Lewis is not anti-science, but he is sometimes attacked for being anti-science. But Lewis actually responds to these accusations of him being anti-science with this. This is actually C.S. Lewis himself speaking. He says, "It certainly is an attack, if not on scientists, yet on something which might be called scientism, a certain outlook on the world which is casually connected with the popularization of the sciences, though it is much less common among real scientists than among their readers. It is, in a word, the belief that the supreme moral end is the perpetuation of our own species, and that this is to be pushed even if, in the process of being fitted for survival, our species has to be stripped of all those things from which we value, of pity, of happiness, and of freedom. Under modern conditions, any effective invitation to hell will certainly appear in the guise of scientific planning, as Hitler's regime, in fact, did. Every tyrant must begin by claiming to have what his victims respect and to give what they want. The majority in most countries respect science and want to be planned, and therefore, almost by definition, if any man or group wishes to enslave us, it will, of course, describe itself as scientific planned democracy. All the more reason to look very careful at anything which bears that label." So he's getting a little bit more talking about the geopolitical world there at the end. Mm-hmm. Lewis is, but you see, Lewis is not concerned with science as a quest for knowledge. Lewis is concerned that science, divorced from any kind of truth or virtue, can actually be used as power over others. He's writing, obviously, less than a decade. He's writing the story less than a decade after World War II, where he sees a lot of the Axis powers using "quote unquote" science, right, mm-hmm. to oppress other people. So it all goes into this idea of Uncle Andrew, where as he's conducting his experiments, he doesn't think much at all about who's hurt and who isn't. It's simply gaining knowledge, and gaining knowledge is the most important thing. And Joseph Pierce, who we've brought up on the show a couple of times before, he does a really great job of explaining why this can be so dangerous. I think kind of the simplest way to think about science versus scientism is that science used to embrace all branches of knowledge, like when we hear political science or social science, right? But now, really ever since the Enlightenment, we think of science as really just the physical sciences. There are certain things like social sciences or political science kind of left over from that world, like some of that language. But when you and I think science, I only think usually physical sciences.
Well, more what some would call hard science.
Exactly, hard science. But the
sciences that, for the most part, you don't have to add the word science to.
Exactly. To know, you don't have to say biological science. You go, oh, it's biology. I know that that's a science. Yes. But here's what Joseph Pierce writes as he's talking about this exact chapter in his own book, Further Up and Further In. But he's talking about chapter 2 here, The Magician's Nephew. He says, ultimately, the difference between healthy science and the evil scientism of Uncle Andrew is the difference between scientia and curiositas, using the Latin words there, as discussed by St. Thomas Aquinas, who writes, now vanity of understanding and darkness of mind are sinful. Therefore, curiosity about intellective sciences may be sinful. And again, that sounds a little harsh maybe, but listen to Joseph Pierce walk us through that. St. Thomas asserts that studiousness is not about knowledge itself, but about the desire and study in the pursuit of knowledge. It was therefore necessary to distinguish between the knowledge itself of truth and the desire for such knowledge. Although the former was good, the latter might be evil. Either because one takes pride in knowing the truth, according to 1 Corinthians, knowledge puffeth up, which is the King James Versions. I love that. Knowledge puffeth up, or because one uses the knowledge of truth in order to sin. In this context, it is evident that Uncle Andrew is guilty of, listen to this phrase, superstitious curiosity in his use of immoral and therefore illicit means to attain knowledge that his wicked godmother herself had acquired.
Wow.
And I know that's a lot more philosophy and science that we usually include here on the show, but I thought it was so interesting.
That is, yeah. It seems like he has some stuff that he wants to do, and then he's using science to justify it.
Exactly.
And he's not the only person who's done this. And I'm curious how, especially World War II, would have influenced Lewis's writing of this.
And again, I think what Pierce writes is so wise when he talks about and the verbs he uses here, right? We got to distinguish between the truth itself, the knowledge itself of truth, and the desire for knowledge. And the desire is not inherently evil or sinful, but it can be problematic. It can be potentially problematic as opposed to knowledge of truth, that desire. And so we see here, like, with Uncle Andrew, him wanting to know more about other worlds or wanting to know about what these rings can do is not inherently sinful. It's not a bad thing to want to know more. That's great. But he made a promise, to a family member that I wasn't going to do this. He breaks that promise, which is not a good thing. That's not virtuous at all. And then in order to learn more, he's willing to sacrifice and kill not only animals, but potentially sacrifice a little girl. And again, he views this as, I don't have to follow those rules because my pursuit of knowledge is more important. Again, like I just read, divorcing this idea of virtue and morality from science. And a lot of people, this is not me being anti-science or anything like that. There's a lot of people who still hold to that, but we can all sometimes we can all sometimes fall into the trap of wanting to make science this very cold thing that doesn't have morals or doesn't have, ethics and morals. That's the social sciences. Don't put that in my hard sciences here, you know. And that's not what God has made the sciences to be.
And it's not like the other sides that aren't science have any better track record. And people have they've misused a lot of stuff that is in the Bible to do horrible things or to justify their doing of horrible things.
Yeah, I mean, even think about when it comes, I think there was this big push, obviously, in the Enlightenment all the way through the 20th and into the 21st century of this kind of, science is facts, and there are no... we have to follow exactly those facts and those data. And there are facts in data, and that's absolutely true. But even look at our current world over the last few years of how, as a culture, especially here in the West, we haven't been able, we've all sometimes looked at the same data and come to different moral or ethical conclusions. And because I think a lot of times we've often said, well, the moral and ethics, that maybe comes after, it doesn't come together along with the science, is why when people are making decisions about their health or about science, data in general, we struggle to be like, how do we make good moral decisions in light of these things, because we don't think of them often as going together. I mean, for so long, I think about how often in my biology classes in high school, we didn't really talk about ethics. We didn't really talk about that. And I think one of the things that people are slowly rediscovering, I think, is that you have to have ethics and morality in everything that you study. whatever you're studying, you need to be talking about these other implications, these virtues that go along with it.
It seems like it probably will come in cycles as well. There were experiments that were done in the 60s and 70s as the field of psychology was growing that are no longer considered ethical. And a lot of those, like the prison experiments especially, those weren't very scientific either.
Yeah.
There are a lot of variables that were not being controlled for.
That's well said. I think that is a great way to kind of end this little sidebar here. That I find, and it'll come up a lot, I find Uncle Andrew to be one of the most compelling characters that Lewis has ever written, because of the way that Lewis sets him up just to completely tear down his worldview and to tear down his philosophy. And I think what also is so great about it is Lewis, who obviously is a Christian and, has a Christian perspective here, is not doing this in a way that's like, this is a secular guy and so I'm tearing him down. He does it with so much more respect for the character, to be like, actually, here's why your beliefs are folly. Here's why they are corrupt and unvirtuous. And I think in a way that everybody, no matter your faith, no matter your worldview, could look at Andrew and find Uncle Andrew and find him detestable. And I think that's what's so great, is everybody looks at this character who's not just evil for the sake of being evil. Like, it's very easy to hate the White Witch. She's just evil. Yeah. This is a character that is a little bit more complicated, although he's still, like I said, quite detestable. And Lewis lets us arrive at that conclusion on our own through both Digory's words and the narrator's words.
Right.
So, I've talked a lot, Philip. So do you want to share a little bit more about what's happening in this chapter?
Well, one of the things that stood out to me is when Uncle Andrew is talking about the origins of the box.
Sure.
And it's the way he groups people, especially. So before he reveals that it's a Atlantean box, he says it wasn't Greek or Old Egyptian or Babylonian or Hittite or Chinese. Mm-hmm. Up through the Hittite part, it sounds like everything's being pulled from biblical sources, because the Greeks are in there, Egyptians are in there, Babylonians, Hittites, and then they also add Chinese, and it just it was a funny jump for me, where he's grouping one group that's kind of all, in the Mediterranean type area, Northern Africa, and then also this entire giant area that hasn't been mentioned.
I wonder if a big reason that he includes Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian, Hittite, and Chinese here are that these are all cultures that have maybe not well documented, but at least partially documented studies of magic, right? Of cultures that studied some form of what maybe they would call it alchemy, or they called it something else, but there was some kind of study. At least in their ancient, go all the way back to some of these ancient cultures here. That's what I think he's talking about. We talked about all these. I think he's thinking only of ancient cultures. But if you go back to some of the ancient Chinese, think about Yellow River Valley, there are some sources that look at these cultures studying, like, how could we turn this this metal into gold? How can we turn iron into gold? Is there some kind of, process we can do? And they might not have used the word magic, but they were looking at ways to kind of, I think alchemy is a good example. And so I wonder if that's kind of where Uncle Andrew's coming from, is he's thinking of, I knew it wasn't from one of these. I know that what I have here is magic. All of these cultures have, at least in their mythology or even in some of their records, attempt at, lowercase magic here of some kind, or some kind of supernatural, whatever. I knew it wasn't those, and that's how I knew it had to be from the island of Atlantis.
Yeah. So where does Atlantis fit in our history? Where does the legend come from? What's the origin?
So I hate to tell you that Atlantis isn't real. At least we don't believe it is.
So that animated cartoon depicting it with all the technology
that was actually
they had?
Not real. I did not mention that when we first brought it up. Yeah. Not real. I'm not super familiar at all with the mythology or legend of Atlantis. In fact, I'm not even sure where it's, according to legend, supposed to be. I remember like a little bit about potentially at like the Strait of Gibraltar But that could be totally off. I've heard potentially that it was at the mouth of the Mediterranean. Like I feel like I heard. I say like I in my back of my brain I have something there, but that could have been completely off. So maybe that's something that I wonder if we have any Atlantis scholars here listening to the show.
Well, Jason Momoa didn't answer our email requesting a comment.
I don't understand the joke.
He plays Aquaman.
Oh, is Aquaman from Atlantis? I don't know anything about Aquaman.
Yeah, everything's...
That's like Atlantis. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because they're...
I'm not familiar with DC like characters at all, so I did not realize that had any relation to Atlantis whatsoever. That totally makes sense now, though, right? Yeah. I thought he was like a mermaid or a merman. Is he not? I really thought he was a merman.
I don't think so.
No. Okay. So again, I've never seen the movie. I did watch Justice League in theaters.
Did you watch the 3-hour Snyder Cut?
No. There's no possible way I would ever do that. Not at all. I barely made it through the 90-minute one. That was so. Movie Pass is the only reason I went to go see that movie.
Oh man, yeah, that was great. That was a great era.
So getting back to the chapter here, we learn more and more that Uncle Andrew, as he finds out about this dust, he somehow forms it into rings, and that's when he begins some of these experiments. And he comes to the conclusion, although he actually hasn't proved this yet, he comes to the conclusion that the green rings, a yellow ring will, if you touch that, will take you to another world, a world outside of our world, not another planet, but a different universe. And that a green ring will bring you back. And I have a question for you, Phil, because I struggle with this. Is there any way, do the colors represent anything here? To Uncle Andrew. I'm not talking about from a metatextual level, but in the actual narrative itself, is there a reason that Uncle Andrew's like, oh, yellow means go and green means come back?
Not as far as I can tell.
No, it's just that
maybe it's this system where like go means go ahead and come back. And
that
orange means
green
aren't you
go
glad
ahead
you didn't
and shut up about it, right? Is that the... The episode's so funny because Dwight runs in and does all the wrong things just because Michael's color coding system makes absolutely no sense.
Right.
It's like red means like stop being quiet about it or something like that.
Yeah.
It's a little... Okay, I can see from his perspective where yellow might mean they've gone somewhere else, because when an animal touches a yellow one, they disappear. But he's never given it... From my perspective as a reader, or from Digory's perspective as a character in this conversation, he has nothing to prove that green brings you back other than it's a different color, so maybe it brings you back, right? Yellow means go there. For all they know, green could just be to a different world past that one. I don't know. There's nothing that backs up this. He's not a good scientist at all.
I feel like it just well, obviously he's not a great scientist.
Well, he's not an ethical scientist, but he's also pretty bad. He's even bad at being an unethical
scientist. He's just objectively bad at it.
He's objectively poor at
I'm
this.
also curious, did he make the rings and sprinkle powder on them? Are they donuts?
There you go.
I'm picturing very small kind of...
I would assume our wedding rings that we're wearing.
Okay. I was kind of picturing the fruit that's a little bit sour.
So you think it's one of those orange rings, a big fat one?
Because when I think old person candy, that's one of the things I think of.
He doesn't tell us how he makes these rings, right?
Right.
He just takes dust and makes it into rings. Is
there a giant bowl of them? Does he have this heap of rings to test?
I assume there's 4 rings. There's 2 yellow and 2 green. I don't know if he actually says total. I know that right here on that desk. Back in the last chapter, there are 4. 2 yellow, 2 green. Polly has taken a yellow. Digory is taking 2 greens with him. And he's going to touch the yellow one at the end of this chapter. What I don't know is, like you said, on the bookshelf, are there 45 more rings?
Right.
How much dust did Uncle Andrew need to make the rings? Are they, like you said, are they completely made out of dust that somehow he's magically turned into... a ring, or is it there was a couple bits of dust and he just happened to make rings? And that actually, I'm going to go with this. Yeah, I like this idea better. He had gold, jewelry of some kind. He took it to a jeweler, said, I'd like to melt this necklace down and turn it into a ring. And then can I also sprinkle a little bit of this in there with it? So they're mostly metal rings with a little bit of fairy dust in
Yeah.
them. Atlantean dust, excuse me.
Yeah.
Not the fairy godmother. I was getting confused here with all of our stuff.
Yeah. Well, Lewis is pulling from a lot of
Yeah.
places.
So that's what I'm going. Do you agree? Do you think something different? Did he make them? Are they like Play-Doh rings? He just rolled the dust together.
Yeah, I
Made it
feel
look-
like he added a little bit of egg white and then whisked it together. That's my.
And that's They're like they also like they smell awful. Like Digory's really bothered
Yeah,
by it. And he's like,
That's why he struggles. That's why he hesitates. Just
he
'cause-
hesitates not because he's afraid of going to a world. He's like, these rings don't smell good. Something's wrong about it all.
So all the jokes about his science ability aside, he is excellent at getting people to do what he wants them to do. So far, he sent Polly away just by offering her one of the shiny rings.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because of the way he did that and not giving her away back, and somehow knowing Digory, he gets Digory to go after her on his own volition in a way.
Yeah, it's a good plan. I mean, I'm not saying it's a virtuous one, but it's well thought out up to here. Of like as long as you get the girl to take, as long as you get Polly to take the first ring, he knows enough about Digory that he's able to go, look, this kid's not going to let her. She's not going to let her die. He's going to go, and so he is very manipulative, and he's good at that. It's not something you want to be good at.
You don't want to aspire to be that way.
But he is good at that.
But we have to acknowledge
it's
that
like
he
one of
is.
those times if you ever, I've never felt this way. But when you're a teacher and you have to find something good to put on a report card. You're like, the kid's very manipulative. He's good at being manipulative. I'm just kidding. So any other thoughts before we move on to this last little part of the conversation here, where Digory does decide to go take this ring?
Yeah, let's talk about him kind of getting the gumption to take this journey. He has no idea where he's going. We have a sense as readers, assuming this isn't your first book, which maybe it is.
Sure.
But this is pretty scary. And one thing that I found really helpful when reading stuff like this is when you're reading this, try to picture what it would actually be like knowing that someone actually just disappeared and how freaky that would be. Because I think we get used to it. You consume enough media, you're used to unnatural things happening and people disappearing and reappearing, and you just kind of start to take it for granted. But that would be so freaky. And he's had this conversation. It hasn't gone especially well.
Yeah.
He knows that his uncle can't be trusted, and he's still going to do it.
Yeah, this is a great moment for Digory. It really is as a character. He's someone here who, in contrast to all of the cowardice inside of Uncle Andrew, we see a lot of courage here from Digory and absolutely knowing what's right and wrong. It's like he absolutely doesn't want to do this. He's not excited to go, but he almost feels like he has no choice in the best possible way. Where he's like, look, this young girl has been taken away into another land, and it was part of my plan to have us go across the attic in the first place. Like, the only right option, like the only objectively right thing to do is to try to go save her.
Right.
And that very much is juxtaposed with the moral relativism of Uncle Andrew.
I was going to say it would be so easy for him to talk his way out of it. Well, she came here on her own accord.
She didn't have to go touch that,
That's not my truth. I don't have to stick to these guidelines that I don't even know who set up about what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
But instead, he just has that inner sense of, no, this is what you need to do.
Yeah. So he goes up to the rings, touches the rings, and he is whisked away.
It doesn't even say that, and I actually really liked.
You actually don't think he disappears yet, does he?
Yeah, this chapter ends on a moment right before the cliffhanger.
Okay, tell us.
Instead of him disappearing and us wondering, oh, where did he go? I feel like we already know that he's going to go to the same place that Polly went, at least the same world. So that wouldn't be much of a cliffhanger, but he just takes a deep breath and picks up the ring. And we don't know whether or not he disappeared. So it wasn't instant.
Okay, yeah.
But for some reason, it makes me want to turn the page more. And now that we've recorded this episode,
you can do that. Tell me, Phil, what's going to happen in this next chapter? Where is he going? What is it going to be like?
I think he will arrive where Polly arrived, but it's been a longer amount of time than he realizes, and he has to figure out how to reunite with her. And I imagine an animal is going to talk to him in the next chapter.
Where is that? Where have they gone? Do the simple answer.
to Narnia.
Okay, so
Yes.
they're going to arrive in Narnia, and there's going to be talking animals there.
Yes.
Pretty kind of like we know what this is the sixth book. We know what to expect.
And this will be before all the stuff that we've read about.
So they'll be going back to Narnia before, like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe time period.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, next chapter, I wanted to hear kind of your thoughts before, because have you read even seen what the next chapter is called?
I haven't even looked at the title.
Great. Well, the next chapter, chapter 3 of The Magician's Nephew, I'm stalling here so I can pull it up. Here we go. Is called The Wood Between the Worlds.
Okay, so there's going to be a little purgatory action. I got you.
So I didn't say that, but and in that chapter, chapter 3, Digory and Polly explore the wood between the worlds. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to write anything else in the little description.
I appreciate that. I'm imagining in the Matrix sequels where they're waiting for a train for what seems like 2 hours.
I don't remember that at all, but okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I will tell you that chapter 4, I'm not going to tell you the name of it, although it really wouldn't give anything away. I'm looking here because I write all these little non-spoiler descriptions out. Chapter 4, so chapter 3 is Digory and Polly explore the wood between the worlds, and in chapter 4 I've written Digory makes a poor decision. So that's also something you can look forward to. Not yet, because
you should write TV Guide movie summaries.
Yeah, I feel like I did read a lot of those growing up, so it's like I know how to write a nice succinct thing that kind of is, hey, you haven't actually read this or seen this yet, so we'll put,
Forrest Gump, a man waits for a bus and talks to the person sitting next to him.
well, let's wrap up here. We've got some listener feedback. We've got an email from Joy. Phil, would you read this email for us?
Definitely.
I picked this one. I thought this would be a great email for us, knowing that Polly and Digory have gone away somewhere else now.
How do you say this city name? Is it Cheshire?
I would assume Cheshire. In the UK, they usually do not say like Cheshire.
Right.
But maybe we're wrong. I would have assumed Cheshire in the UK. Apologies to Joy if we're wrong.
Right. This is from Joy from Cheshire.
It's actually, we are pronouncing it correctly to everyone in the UK. It's just you're hearing our American accents. But if we, that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's not our inability to pronounce things correctly.
Same goes for our French.
Sure, exactly.
In the Bureau. So Joy writes, "Hi guys, greetings from England. As a lifelong fan of Narnia, I have loved listening to your podcast after discovering them a few months ago. As I've listened, 2 things came to mind. Firstly, you mentioned twice about hot chocolate or frothy chocolate and said you didn't really know what it is. As a Brit, I can reliably inform you that it's a hot chocolate drink, frequently drunk here. It's a powder that you mix with either hot milk or water, usually milk. Sometimes we load thick cream on top with marshmallows too. Maybe you have cocoa in the USA? If so, it's similar but with sugar already added and maybe a bit less rich. Please let me know if you'd like some and I'll send you a tub. Secondly, I've started to wonder if Narnia is a country or a world. In the silver chair..."
Let's pause there and talk about hot chocolate first. Can I interrupt Joy's email?
Definitely.
I was confused by this email at first. Mm-hmm. Went back. I can't remember which episode it was, but I did find it. There we talked, I think it was way back in season 1, potentially, where Edmund gets hot. I think that's where it was. I can't remember off the top of my head now. And I listened to it. It totally sounds like you and I have no idea what hot chocolate is. I was like, man, like we have hot chocolate here. I don't really like hot chocolate, but we do. Yeah. And I listened to it, like, no, it literally, because you and I, what was the first thing she just called it? You have the email in front of you.
Frothy chocolate.
So yeah, I think that's might be been how Lewis wrote it or how we talked about it, and we were like, pretty much like, so what is that? Like, what do you think that is? And it definitely sounds like we have no idea what hot chocolate is.
Yeah.
So Joy, thank you. I can't believe no one else has ever written to us about this.
Right.
That episode's been out there. If it's the episode I'm thinking of, it's been out there for over 4 years, and everyone's just thought, wow, these guys have no idea what hot chocolate is.
They're novices.
They're like, yeah, everyone's just really nice. Joy, thank you though for being like, I don't want these guys to live in ignorance for their entire lives. I want to help them out. So we do appreciate that.
So we do know what hot chocolate is, but we didn't really know what frothy chocolate.
But it is the same thing, and we didn't know that. Yes. Yeah. So go ahead, because the second part of the emails is the main reason. This is great too, the first part, but the main reason I picked it for this particular episode.
Okay. Joy resumes. Secondly, I've started to wonder if Narnia is a country or a world. In the silver chair, they clearly leave Narnia, as also in Dawn Treader. But in The Magician's Nephew and Last Battle, redacted, I think that was Daniel's
I wrote
edit,
that part. Yeah, I redacted that part.
implies that Narnia is a whole world rather than just a country. I'm a little confused and wonder if you've ever noticed this problem. Well, Joy, I'm glad you brought this up because we find it confusing when there are 6 countries in the UK. So maybe that's where Lewis is pulling from.
Wonder. It is clear that Narnia is a country in this other world. The Horse and His Boy, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair make it clear that Narnia is a particular country that exists alongside other countries, like Archenland, like Calormen. So Joy's exactly right. In The Silver Chair, when they travel north to the Ettinsmoor, they clearly leave the kingdom of Narnia. Caspian the 10th is not king over Archenland. He's not king over the Calormens. Or, in fact, or just back to The Horse and His Boy, last book, we learned that Susan is not queen over the Calormens. When they go to Tashbaan, she is not royalty there. So Narnia is clearly a kingdom. However, the thing that's confusing that I redacted, but it still stays true, is that some of the other books which were written after, make it sound as if Narnia is also a word to represent the entire magical world.
Right.
If you think about that Pauline Baines map, that shows all the way to the northern parts where you see Harfang at the top and Calormen at the bottom and the sea on the east, that all of that is also Narnia, maybe. I think that when I think of Narnia, I think kind of colloquially, when we think of Narnia, we all just think of the magical world. I think when we talk about the Chronicles of Narnia, in fact, there's some of the books that don't really take place much in Narnia. I think that's kind of led me to the conclusion that the word is used for both. That Lewis uses Narnia to mean both the kingdom, but also the magical world, and that there is not necessarily another name for the magical world in which Narnia exists inside of, and so sometimes the word Narnia is just used for that entire magical world.
Yeah, Dre, I'm glad you brought this up. I've also been confused about it. I think it started to become confusing once they journeyed outside of Narnia, but we're still in Narnia, and it became harder to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think that makes sense. This isn't a perfect example, but you can hold Earth in your hand, but you also live on Earth, and you could never hold the Earth. We use the same words for different things.
But if you think about that metaphor, it'd be like saying that the whole solar system is Earth, which it's not.
It's not?
It's not Earth.
Okay.
Yeah, I got about 500 years of not even
Narnia is flat, right? So all your rules are out
of astronomy to share with you. Maybe this though.
You're a Taurus, right?
This is don't do that. This is actually something that comes up in the world of Star Wars, actually, which is that in the movies themselves, they sometimes use planet names and solar system names interchangeably. Like there's in The Empire Strikes Back, they talk about going to Bespin, where Lando is, but Han Solo clearly says, Lando, or he says it's not a system, it's a person, as in implying, that when they sometimes say planet names like Hoth, they're talking about the system, like the solar system. For instance, when they go into the Hoth system at the beginning of that movie, they go, oh, they're on one of these planets. Or, for instance, Yavin 4, which is the fourth moon of Yavin, but it's unclear if that's the system is called Yavin or the planet. That happens a couple. The Dagobah system. You must go to the Dagobah system.
Yeah,
and it's like, wait, is Dagobah that planet's name?
Yeah, so that narrows it down to 20 planets in the Dagobah.
Or is
system.
it? Yeah, or could it be that that's a solar system with just one planet in it, so they call it the Dagobah system? I mean, I don't know, but it's one of those things where it's like, I don't actually know what you're describing. Yeah. So I see George Lucas, again, we've mentioned many times, huge Narnia fan, pulls a lot of his world building from this. He's like, I love the way that people are confused about Narnia. I'm going to do a similar thing.
Yep.
Although he didn't write Empire Strikes Back. That's Larry Kasdan. But Larry Kasdan, also big Narnia fan. They all are, right? Lee Brackett, who wrote the original treatment for that script as well. All big Narnia fans.
Yeah. They loved the way he pulled from a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
They use that a lot in the prequels.
There is.
We're going to have a little bit of Italy, Rome, has some Colosseum type stuff in there.
Sure. They actually filmed quite a bit in Italy for Naboo. Yeah, they did. Most of it was green screen, but a couple of Italy things. Oh. At this point, by the way, our Star Wars episode has come out, which is kind of fun.
That's right.
Our big May the 4th be with you episode. It's been on our minds, obviously, which is why we're bringing it up now. So.
Yeah. We did a really good job with that.
I thought it was wonderful. We haven't recorded it yet. just planned it. So hopefully it went well.
The amount of planning and pre-production work and scheduling that we do, I'd say is on par with what Disney Plus is dealing with right now. Just everything has to work together.
Yeah.
It's so hard. We have to do one episode out of order. And it's proving to be quite a scheduling challenge.
Well, let's go ahead and wrap our time up.
Well, let me finish the email.
Go ahead. Wasn't over.
There's a little bit left.
Did I interrupt a second time? I am so sorry,
I clicked
Joy.
on the redacted part, and I am now going to read the spoiler.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
No. I hit it, so you can't.
She says, I will remain a lifelong fan, and thank you so much for helping me feel that I'm not alone in my passion for these wonderful books and their fabulous writer, C.S. Lewis. God bless you both. Joy.
All right. Sorry, Joy, that I interrupted you
Joy,
twice
thank you so
there.
much for emailing us. That was really nice.
Yeah, that was a really great email. A lot of great discussion that we get to have because of that. And if any other listeners have thoughts on what could we call this world, if we don't want to call it Narnia and no one seems to have a clear answer, let's make up a word together. Let's just decide. It'll be, and we'll write into the C.S. Lewis Company. And we'll let them know.
Yeah.
We've made the decision.
Because if there's anything that can improve a work, it's adding stuff to it 70 plus years later.
Absolutely. What a great way to end, Phil. Do you want to wrap up our time?
Sure. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. If you have any listener feedback, we'd love to hear it. You can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com, or if you prefer voicemail, 406-646-6733. We'd also appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps others find the show and join our read-through. Thanks for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time for Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. Bye, everybody.